Hundreds of people are doing unbelievable things in our country, and sometimes they do it under a blanket, almost undercover. At his peak, Cliff Richard was one of the biggest stars Britain had ever seen. For decades, he was the voice of joy, the symbol of decency. Something to be theatrical. It depends on how your back is. I used to have trouble with the lower part of my back. The man who never seemed to fall. But in a matter of hours, everything came music, crashing down when he found himself at the center of the biggest scandal of his life. What followed was a devastating period that nearly broke him. He tried to rebuild and move forward. I didn't think I'd ever do an album where I'd be singing brand new songs again because that seemed to be way past me. But nothing music ever felt the same again. And now at 85, unmarried, childless, and facing a heartbreaking health challenge, things aren't looking so good for the man who once dominated the entire entertainment, music industry. The rise of Cliff Richard. Most people describe Cliff Richard as Britain's polite answer to Elvis Presley. He has sold more than 250 million records, placed 68 music singles in the British top 10, and received a knighthood from the Queen. For 6 decades, music. His voice has been one of the most familiar sounds in popular music. But the man who sang about joy and celebration has lived a life marked by a loneliness most people would never imagine. Cliff Richard was born on October 14, 1940 in northern British India. His father, Roger Oscar Webb, managed a catering contractor that serviced the Indian Railways, while his mother, Dorothy Marie Dazzely, raised Cliff alongside his 3 sisters, Joan, Jackie, and Donna. The family lived comfortably enough by the standards of the time, but that security rested on a government structure that was already beginning to crumble. When Indian independence came in 1947, the family faced a choice that thousands of British families in India had to make. Stay in a country that no longer wanted them or return to a homeland most of them had never really known. They chose to leave. They sold their belongings, packed what remained, and boarded a ship called the SS Ranchi for a 3-week music voyage to Tilbury, Essex. But the England they found was not the England they had seen in postcards. There was no warm welcome waiting at the docks. There was only a semi-detached house in Chulton, Surrey, where Cliff's maternal grandmother took them in temporarily. From relative wealth in India, they had descended into something closer to survival in post-war Britain. Eventually, the family moved to a 3-bedroom council house in Chesant, Hertfordshire, and that's where the true hardship began. Cliff shared a bedroom with 2 of his music 3 sisters, and money was so tight that the family developed a specific music strategy to stretch it. 3 times a week, dinner consisted of nothing but hot tea and toast sprinkled with sugar. That meal was not a treat or a nostalgic memory. It was the only thing they could afford. Cliff attended Cheshunt Secondary Modern School from 1952 to 1957, where he placed in the top stream and stayed beyond the minimum leaving age to pass his music GCE ordinary level examination in English literature. Outside the classroom, he excelled at athletics, playing football for his school and eventually for the county of Hertfordshire. But the thing that truly grabbed hold of him was music, specifically the American rock and roll he heard on records. His parents thought it was a dreadful noise, but Cliff thought it was the future. When he was 16, his father bought him a guitar, an act of reluctant support that would prove transformative. Not long after, Cliff left school and took a job as a filing clerk in an electrical music factory where his father also worked. But the job was just a way to pass the time until the music could take over. In 1957, he formed a school vocal harmony group called the Quintinonies with 2 other boys and 3 girls, performing cover versions of current hits. He sang briefly with the Dick Teague Skiffle group before deciding to form his own rock group, which he called the Drifters. The name would soon become a problem, but first came a much bigger change. At his manager's request, he changed his name from Harry Webb to Cliff Richards to suit the music industry. His first major gig came in 1958 at the Regal Ballroom in Ripley, Derbyshire. But the real breakthrough arrived on July 24 of that year at Abbey Road Studios. The producer, Norrie Paramore from Music EMI's Columbia label, had heard Cliff and invited him to audition. The plan was to record an American tune called Music Schoolboy Crush as the aside with a song called Move It tucked away on the side. Schoolboy Crush took nearly 2 hours to record. Move It, written by Ian Samuel, took less time and produced Music, a sound that left no room for doubt. Move It reached number 2 on the UK singles chart in the autumn of 1958, and British rock and roll had its first homegrown star. From there, the achievements came faster than anyone could track. He would eventually make the UK singles charts in every one of its first 6 decades, a feat shared only with Elvis Presley. He would stack up 68 music top 10 singles and 14 number-ons, including 4 Christmas number-ons, more than any other artist. But none of that success fixed what was quietly broken, music, underneath. The polite smile and the flawless suits covered a personal life that never found the same kind of victory. And in August 2014, everything Cliff Richard had spent decades building came down within a matter of hours. The lowest moment of his life. In August 2014, Cliff Richard was in Portugal on holiday when he turned on a television and watched police officers search his home. He had not been told the search was happening, nor had he been told why. He learned about it the same way millions of viewers did through live coverage broadcast, music, from a helicopter hovering above his apartment. The story that led to that moment began nearly 30 years earlier in music, 1985 at a football stadium in Sheffield. Bramall Lane, the home of Sheffield United, was hosting an event led by American evangelist Billy Graham. Among the crowd that day was a teenage boy who would years later make a horrifying allegation against Cliff Richard. For a public figure who had built his entire career on a clean-cut, family-friendly image, the accusation alone carried the potential to destroy everything. When the Metropolitan Police received the allegation, officers were already working on Operation U-Tree, a major inquiry launched after the Jimmy Savile scandal. At the time, there was a strong national focus on past abuse cases, so new claims were handled with care and attention. In July 2014, the Metropolitan Police passed the information to South Yorkshire Police. And from that moment, a chain of events was set in motion that Cliff Richard could not see coming. He denied the allegation immediately and consistently. And he would continue to deny it for years. But denial did not stop what happened next. South Yorkshire Police decided to search his penthouse apartment in Sunningdale, Berkshire in August 2014. Before the search took place, a BBC journalist named Dan Johnson learned that the investigation existed. What happened between the police and the BBC would later be described in court as a deal. Though both parties disputed that word, the BBC agreed to delay breaking the story about the investigation. In return, South Yorkshire Police agreed to tip the BBC off about the exact timing of the raid. A retired detective superintendent named Matthew Fenwick later told the High Court that he felt forced into this arrangement. Johnson had made it clear, Fenwick said, that the BBC could and would publish the story regardless of whether the police cooperated. Music. The police felt they had no option other than to work with the BBC to control the timing of the coverage. That was the justification offered, but the result looked very different from the outside. On the day of the raid, the BBC broadcast live footage from a helicopter that was already hovering above Cliff Richard's address. Viewers watched officers on his property. The coverage treated him, as human rights lawyer Jeffrey Robertson later put it, like a bank robber or a mass murderer. The man at the center of it watched from a hotel room in Portugal, having received no advanced warning from anyone. He was thousands of miles away while his home was searched on live television. After the raid, the BBC nominated its coverage for a Royal Television Society Scoop of the Year award. It did not win, but the nomination itself would later carry legal consequences. For 2 years, the investigation hung over Cliff Richard's life. He continued to deny the allegation. The Crown Prosecution Service reviewed the evidence and on June 16, 2016, the CPS announced its decision. There was insufficient evidence to proceed with any charges. Cliff Richard was never arrested. He was never charged. The investigation closed without a single legal finding against him. But the damage was already done. The live broadcast had been seen by millions. The story had traveled around the world. His reputation, built over 56 years of relentless work, had been stained in a single day. In July 2016, he filed suit against both South Yorkshire Police and the BBC. The legal battle took nearly 2 years to reach the High Court. When the hearing opened in April 2018, it was scheduled to last 10 days. The testimony would be painful and the revelations about how the police and the BBC had coordinated would be even worse. On July 18, 2018, High Court Judge Anthony Mann delivered the verdict. The BBC, he ruled, had infringed Cliff Richard's privacy rights without legal justification and in a serious and sensationalist way. The police were also found liable. The damages awarded were substantial, £190,000 in general damages from the BBC, plus an additional £20,000 in aggravated damages specifically because of the Scoop of the Year nomination. The BBC was ordered to pay 65% of the total, with South Yorkshire Police paying the remaining 35%.
Oh, I didn't know.
I didn't wear makeup in those days. Although no, we did on stage. We did, but we didn't know how to do it. The police force had already agreed to pay Cliff Richard £400,000 in a separate settled claim. Later, the BBC agreed to pay an additional £850,000 to cover his legal fees, plus £315,000 to South Yorkshire Police to reimburse its court costs. But even those sums did not tell the full story. Cliff Richard testified that the case had cost him £3.4 million up to that point, including lawyers and lost business. He said his life had been effectively turned upside down and his reputation worldwide was unnecessarily damaged. The words were measured, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. A man who had spent decades avoiding scandal had become the subject of a scandal that did not even exist. After the verdict, something, snorts, shifted in Cliff Richard. The interviews grew less frequent. The public appearances slowed. The man who had once seemed inseparable from British popular culture began to disappear from it. The disappearance from the public eye. Between August 2014 and June 2016, Cliff Richard lived through 22 months that he would later describe in court with a level of detail that suggested the wounds had not healed at all. The investigation did not end after one news cycle or 1 week of bad publicity. It stretched across nearly 2 full years. And by the time it was over, the man who walked out of the High Court was not the same man who had watched that helicopter from a hotel room in Portugal. The physical changes were the first thing people noticed. He lost a considerable amount of weight, not because he was trying to, but because the stress affected him. His body succumbed to shingles, a painful condition that often flares up when the immune system is under prolonged attack from music, anxiety, and sleeplessness. The mental health deterioration was severe enough to be entered into the court record, and he did not try to downplay it. He told the court that at one point he actually thought he was going to have a heart attack or a stroke. What he saw in the mirror disturbed him even more. He said that sometimes he looked at his own reflection and felt like someone else, a much older version of himself, was looking back. The man who had spent decades performing for millions could barely recognize his own face. Sleep became its own punishment. He would wake up in the middle of the night and go over things in his head again and again, replaying conversations that had never happened and imagining outcomes that never came. During the day, there was an ever-present knot in his stomach that would not loosen no matter how many times he told himself he had done nothing wrong. That was the cruelest part of the experience. He knew he was innocent, but knowing did not stop the physical symptoms. He described the period as feeling as though everything he had worked for during his life, trying to live as honestly and honorably as he could, was being torn apart. After the raid, he never lived in the Sunningale apartment again. He used a specific word in court to explain why. He said the apartment had become contaminated. In his mind, the space where police officers had searched his belongings on live television could never again be a home. He returned only to pack up his belongings, and even that was difficult. He testified that he had been burgled before and that this experience was worse than being burgled. A burglary, at least, does not unfold on national television while you watch from another country. The public withdrawal that followed was not a strategic decision. It was survival. The investigation disrupted an album release and a revised edition of his autobiography. But those professional setbacks were minor compared to what happened to his charitable work. He said the publicity seriously disrupted his personal life, but also his charitable work and his plans for his professional work. The disruption was total. He became conscious that people around the world might think he was a serious criminal and that awareness followed him everywhere. He said that every place he had ever been, he felt his name was smeared. That feeling did not leave when the Crown Prosecution Service announced there was insufficient evidence to charge him. The announcement cleared him legally, but it did not reach every person who had seen the helicopter footage. It did not reach every person who had read the headlines or every person who had already made up their mind. In the mid-2010s, he largely withdrew from the public eye. The man who had once seemed incapable of staying out of the spotlight, found that the spotlight had become unbearable. Fame could no longer shield him. The thing he had spent his entire career building, a reputation for decency, cleanliness and harmlessness, had been damaged in a way that a court ruling could not fully repair. He said later that while it was tempting to just try to forget the whole episode, he decided to take legal action to perhaps make it less likely that anyone else would have to go through a similar experience. He believed that unless someone is formally charged, their name should not be made public. That belief, born from his own suffering, has since influenced changes in UK media law. But a legal victory does not give a man back his peace of mind. He never got those 2 years back. The damage was done. By the time he emerged from the legal battle, something else had become clear to anyone paying attention. Cliff Richard, a man who had spent his entire adult life unmarried with no public romantic partnerships or confirmed long-term relationships, was living a life most fans couldn't imagine. A life marked by loneliness. Cliff Richard has sold more records than almost any other British artist in history. He has headlined arenas on 5 continents. He has been a household name for 7 decades. Yet, he has never walked down an aisle or heard someone call him dad. The silence he once said he returned to after concerts was not a metaphor. Cliff has never married and has no children. And for several years, he has consistently stated that this was a conscious choice, not a lack of opportunity. Women have been interested. He has admitted as much. But he did not say yes to any of them. And the reasons he has given over the decades reveal a man who made peace music, with his decision early only to find that peace dissolving in old age. The first reason he gives is his faith. Cliff became a devout Christian in 1965 and he believes marriage requires total commitment. Cliff confessed that he, music, did not feel able to balance that level of commitment with the demands of a career that sent him around the world for months at a time. The second reason flows from the first. He once said that his main priority has always been music and touring and that he did not want to drag someone else into that lifestyle. Another reason he chose not to get married is because he values his independence. He has explained that he enjoys living alone and does not feel lonely, or at least he did not feel lonely for most of his life. The third reason is more pragmatic. He did not want to risk entering marriage only to face divorce which conflicted with his religious beliefs. Better not to marry at all, he reasoned, than to marry and fail. He once said, music, that people often make the mistake of thinking that only marriage equals happiness. He added that he might suddenly meet someone,